Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on November 19th, 2024 for Reason to Resist. And today I am very pleased to be joined again by my dear friend and comrade, Rehab Nazzal. Rehab Nazzal joins us from Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank, where she has much to report since we last spoke. And just by way of background, if you haven't seen one of my interviews of Rahab or any of the reports that we did together when I was in Palestine in March of this year, Rahab is a Palestinian-Canadian artist who has been systematically vilified by the Israel lobby in Canada for her amazing artistic endeavors and how it highlights the struggle for liberation of the Palestinian people in such a powerful way. Rahab was shot by an Israeli sniper in Bethlehem in 2015, late 2015. She was shot in the leg while she was filming peacefully the activities of an Israeli skunk truck. I then acted for Rahab as her counsel in an effort to get the Canadian government to do something about the shooting and to ensure that the soldier who shot her was held accountable. And effectively what the Trudeau government did for 2 years was ignore us. And as far as we know, did absolutely nothing to hold the Israeli sniper accountable. And also, this is not the first time in which Rahab's family had to deal with the violence of the Israeli regime. Her brother, Khaled Nazzal, was assassinated in the streets of Athens by agents of the Mossad in 1986. Khaled was understood to be Central Committee Secretary of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And so I'm very pleased that Rahab is able to join us today, despite the risks that she takes on every single minute of every single day that she is within the reach of the Israeli genocidal regime. Thank you for joining us today, Rahab.
Thank you, my friend. It's nice to see you.
So just before we began, you let me know that the Israeli military has launched a major operation in the Jenin area. Could you tell us what you know about this?
Yeah. I arrived today from Jenin. I drove for the first time. I wasn't able to drive on my own for the past year, over a year. I left because I have work here, I have students, but Israeli forces invaded Jenin and the surrounding towns, including Ash-Shuhada and Qabatiyeh, last night around midnight. And since then, they're continuing their destructive tactics and practices across Jenin refugee camp, and these towns. So far, they killed 3 young men from Qabatiyeh. They fired rockets on the house where they were in Ash-Shuhada, and they bulldozed their bodies. This is horrific practice that they have been doing. Bulldozed their practice after they shattered their bodies. They were according to friends' testimonies, there were some pieces of their bodies left in the house, but they bulldozed the house and seized them, took them with them. For what? This is a practice common in here for organ harvesting, or you never know, to just torture the families. Mm-hmm. They burned so far 5 houses in Jenin and Jenin refugee camp, as well as Ash-Shuhada. They carved the streets. Dimitri, you have no idea. Like less than 2 weeks ago, they invaded Jenin and Qabatiyeh with these bulldozers, the D9 and other bulldozers on wheels. They destroyed the streets and the infrastructure, and immediately when they withdraw, the people start repairing. Now they are redestroying what the people repaired. Mm-hmm. But the most devastating situation is in the refugee camp. I was there yesterday, and it's like a ghost place. It's destroyed every single house. I visited the cemetery. It's expanding. It's full with photographs of martyrs every day added. Um,
Are they continuing to defile, I imagine they are, the shrine to Shirin Abu Akleh?
oh, absolutely. The street, every time is repaired, they come and destroy it again and again. There is nothing left from that monument.
For those who don't know, Shirin Abu Akleh was a Palestinian-American Al Jazeera reporter who was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. I believe it was 2023. Was it last year or the year before?
22, I think.
And again, no accountability whatsoever for that killing. Rahab, I know this is probably a difficult question, but in your lifetime, have you seen it this bad for the Palestinians living under occupation of the West Bank? So, for example, I'm not sure what you may have personally experienced of the Intifada, the first Intifada, the second Intifada. Is this as bad or worse? How would you compare it to what's happened in the past?
I came here to visit during the second Intifada. I would say this is worst, way worse than any previous atrocity. And to take just the testimonies of the people themselves in Jenin refugee camp, I often ask the people who I interview, how do they compare it to the massacre of 2002? And they say it's uncomparable.
Mm-hmm.
It's much worse. And the first aspect that the soldiers are stripped of any morality, of any decency.
Mm-hmm.
The action of the soldiers is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke about it, I wrote about it briefly, how they just destroy anything, they humiliate, they torture, they kill for nothing. This term that they are under threat, just remove it aside. Like a child yesterday I met in Jenin hospital with all these metal rods in his knee, and I asked him, what's wrong? He said he was walking. He was walking alone in the street when bullets from snipers shattered his knee last July. He's from a nearby village in Jenin, Syria, and he's waiting for an operation. So they just want to eliminate every Palestinian, every Palestinian. It never been that blunt, that clear. The genocide, that settler colonial mentality, they want your land, your life, your property, your even lifestyle, but they don't want you. They want to get rid of you. Like even the sheep, like you see the shepherds in Jericho valleys, they with their sheep, settlers come with their machine guns and they steal their sheep. They steal it and take it. They hit them hard. Of course, they can't do anything when you're unarmed. And the violence is extending, not just in the north, not just in the West Bank. Just last week in Ramallah itself, in Al-Biri, settlers entered Al-Biri and set fire in several cars. And this is the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. Nablus villages are struggling, are suffering from the armed settlers' violence and the Israeli occupation forces because they work together now. Like maybe before you used to complain to the occupation forces about settlers and they can stop them, but now they both together, they coordinate together, they protect each other. And in our case, like the Palestinians in the West Bank, it's not like Gaza. They have no tunnels, they have no weapons whatsoever, And in fact, they have a Palestinian Authority that coordinates with the Israelis. So if there is someone who's in the resistance movement want to fight, this person would face both the occupation forces and the Palestinian Authority. It's bleak, it's difficult, it's very difficult, the situation.
Yesterday I was watching an interview of Tarek Bakoni, who's the president of the board of Al-Shabaka, and he's done graduate work on the occupation. And he said something quite striking. He said that even with all the hardships that the people in Gaza were enduring up until October 7th, many of them looked upon their brothers and sisters in the West Bank almost with a degree of pity and compassion, because at least within Gaza, there was a degree of sovereignty. They had their universities, they had their own hospitals, they had more control over their lives and better ability to resist the occupation than those in the West Bank. You've been to Gaza. You just produced a wonderful documentary about deaf children in Gaza. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that in many ways prior to October 7th, the quality of life for the people of Gaza was in some sense better than it is for the people of West Bank?
I mean, maybe the question is not about the quality of life as much as that sense of freedom. I expressed it at the moment when I was there, and when I spoke to my friends and my children. I said, I've never felt free on a Palestinian territory more than I am here in Gaza, because you walk, you drive, you communicate freely in Gaza. There are no settlers, no settlements, no occupation forces on the ground, although they're surrounding the strip. And they are in the sea, you can see them, and drones over your head. But people were free. They're freer than the population in the West Bank. That's absolutely right, what Bakoni articulated. And now, even worse now.
Yeah. And one thing, that may well have been large part of the motivation for this destruction of Gaza is that the Israelis couldn't stand the thought that the Palestinian people in any part of historic Palestine should have any degree of autonomy or sovereignty. And so they wanted to put an end to that, definitively. I want to talk to you just about your own personal experiences. You go frequently to the area of Jenin because you have family there. And can you describe to us just sort of in some detail what it's like for you to get physically from Bethlehem to Jenin? How far is Jenin in terms of kilometers? And what is involved in you getting there, both in terms of the time and the risks that you have to undertake in order to do that?
Yeah, it's about 182 kilometers between Bethlehem and Jenin. I used to live in Toronto and drive to London, Ontario, which is the same.
It's a little, yeah, it's about 220 kilometers.
Yeah, it's close, but in an hour and a half, I would reach usually in London when I drive early morning, of course. In here, it's supposed to take 2 hours, I would say, but it can extend to 5, 6, 7 hours. It is like I thought of it last time I took a public transportation and it took 5.5 hours. Like you can really fly to Europe within this period of time. The checkpoints are choking the Palestinians intentionally because there is no point of having these checkpoints. They added a new one in the town of Al-Azariya that makes so much congestion in the town itself. And people just stop. My driver slept last time. He slept. He took a long nap in the car because we were not moving. So it's colonizing not just our land, but also our time. You can't plan anything. You can't. Like my sister who you met, Nadia, whenever someone gets out and says goodbye, she says, I don't know if you're going to come back or not, because that's our life. If you go out, you don't know if you're coming back. So the checkpoints, and most recently, they have very young women on the checkpoints that are sick, I would say, mentally ill, these women. They torture women and men who pass. A young man happened to have a checkbook written on it, the Bank of Palestine. And one of these three young soldiers just freaked out, screaming in Hebrew about Palestine. Someone translated to me, there is no Palestine, ripped the book and start hitting the young man who's holding, got him out of the car, handcuffed him. And the driver smiled. She got angry because the driver smiled. These stories, it's just beyond thinking. Beyond thinking, this sickness, this violence embedded in this society. Those young women, reservists, just graduated from school, you never know. The only thing, they have a machine gun and they can hold you, hold your life, kill you, hold your time, prevent you from passing, arrest you. And this would take me to the question of prisoners. Whenever I see images of Israelis in their embassies posting photographs of the Israeli prisoners in Gaza, I just think of the 11,700 Palestinians since last October have been arrested just in the West Bank. And I'm not talking about the previous ones. I'm not talking about the unknown number of prisoners from Gaza. The execution of so many by torture inside these torture camps, they're called. It's beyond thinking, like that value of life in here and there.
And it's important for people to understand that under the military laws, to the extent there are any that Israel applies in the West Bank, it doesn't have to charge any of these detainees with any criminal offense in order to detain them. They have this thing called administrative detention, which allows them to keep them in prison in heinous conditions for up to 6 months at a time. Oftentimes, the detention period is renewed several times. So they routinely, the Israelis, keep Palestinians in prison for extended periods of time without even charging them with an offense, let alone convicting them, as if the convictions in this kangaroo court system actually mean anything. They don't mean anything, because it's not a system of justice, it's not a system of due process. But they don't even have to pretend to have, a criminal charge to lay against these people. And yet we here talk about, the prisoners of war in Gaza as hostages, but these thousands upon thousands of innocent Palestinians, we don't refer to them as hostages. We don't consider them as people who are being held in violation of the laws of war. I want to ask you about, Rahab, the other side of I asked you about how is this compared to the Intifada, for example, what people are going through in the West Bank now. From the perspective of the resistance in the West Bank, do you think that it is more intense now, more extensive than it was during the Intifada, either of the Intifadas? Or do you think that is it your sense that the ability of the militants in the West Bank to put up resistance has been diminished relative to those other periods of intense conflict?
Well, the first Intifada wasn't armed. It was called the Stone Intifada because just the whole population got together just using stones against the occupation for 6-7 years. But the second Intifada, it was an armed resistance, and the PA was involved in it. So those who have weapons were involved in it. In this condition, it just individuals who managed to get their hands on some light weapons. Mostly they buy it from Israelis in a black market. And those are so committed, they're young, like you rarely see above 30 years old. They're very young and very committed, and they train in a very difficult conditions, of course.
Mm-hmm.
There's no territory to train, and there's so many accidents sometimes. I would say, despite Israel's raids and invasions, especially in the north of Gaza, where these resistance members are active, it's not diminishing, and it won't diminish, because every time they kill one, you find a few appear. The anger and rage they create, even in their method of targeting these members, like in Kabati, it was outrageous. It was a war crime just to torture the bodies even after you killing them and trash them from the ceiling and bulldoze them. It's horrific. So people are watching this, and they actually have motivations more than ever to join the resistance movement. You would ask a teenager, and it happened, I was shocked. I asked, what do you wish to be when you grow up? He said, in the resistance movement. Mm-hmm. That's my wish. A profession. I said, this is not profession. He said, that's where I am going to be. So the Israelis won't comprehend this. Mm-hmm. Killing members, targeting members just to create an image of victory, because probably in their news they present that they eliminated 2 terrorists, between 2 quotations, but on the ground, the picture is much different. They are creating actually motivations due to the rage and anger.
Right.
Also watching what's happening in Gaza. The people, what do you think? I mean, Gaza is a province within Palestine. I mean, they have families there. We're connected. So what's happening to us, basically, in Gaza is also outrageous.
In March of this year, you and I met one of these young fighters. He was carrying what looked to me to be a Kalashnikov. I can't remember if it was Tulkarm or Jenin where we encountered this young man. But apparently, you advised me subsequently, apparently he has been killed. What do we know about the circumstances of his death?
I mean, it's really hard to say, because some news, he's from Nur Shams refugee camp in Tulkarm, and I was shocked when I saw, just a few days after you left, a poster of his photograph. Some say the Palestinian Authority targeted them. Others say, no, it's the Israelis. So we don't know. Mm-hmm. In Tubas, they worked together at one point, the PA members. And when I say PA members, in Kabati, 2 of the people who were eliminated by the Israelis, who were murdered, assassinated, they are members of the PA. If the security guard, the highest ranking, they are in the PA. So there are many also from the PA who are part of the resistance movement. Not to put them all together. It's really the upper echelon that's complicit and involved with what's happening.
So your reference to the PA brings me to my last question, Rahab. The Israeli regime has named a character by the name of Yechiel Leiter to be the ambassador of Israel to the United States. And the Trump administration has named Mike Huckabee to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And Leiter, who actually was born and raised not in Palestine, but in Scranton, Ohio, I think where Joe Biden is from, is notorious for the fact that he's a Kahanist. He, I believe, was a member of the JDL in the United States before it was recognized by the FBI to be a terrorist organization. He openly champions the formal annexation of the West Bank. And his American counterpart, Mike Huckabee, is a fanatical evangelical Christian. And just to be clear, I don't buy for 1 second that those people are actually Christians. They call themselves Christians, but they are an affront to the core values of Christianity, in my opinion. In any event, Huckabee is of a similar mind. He basically thinks there's no such thing as a Palestinian. There shouldn't be a Palestinian state. The West Bank, all of historic Palestine, belongs to the Zionist entity. And so my question to you, Rahab, is because it occurred to me that in some perverted sort of way, these two characters might be doing a favor to the Palestinian people. Because if the end result of their advocacy and the dealings of the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, and the Israeli regime are that Israel formally annexes the West Bank, well, on the ground, is that really going to change anything? Because effectively, Israel has annexed the West Bank. It treats the West Bank as its own playground. The Palestinian Authority doesn't really have any sovereignty there. It certainly has much less than the government in Gaza had before October 7th. And maybe then it'll just become absolutely undeniable that the two-state solution is actually the two-state delusion, that there is no peace process, there never was a peace process, and that the Israelis are absolutely intent on either eliminating all Palestinians from historic Palestine or subjecting them to a condition of permanent apartheid. How could they deny that any longer if there's a formal annexation of the West Bank? Where is this so-called Palestinian state going to be if they annex the West Bank? I was curious your thoughts about that. What do you think that, practically speaking, the impact on the Palestinian people would be of a formal annexation of the West Bank by the Israeli regime?
I mean, there is a confusion between our call as Palestinians for one state, one democratic state for all its citizens, regardless of their religion or race or color, and by these calls of annexation. Because what you have here, 7 million Palestinians on the land of Palestine, around 7 million Israelis, but those 7 million Palestinians are barely living on 10% of the land. So annexing the entire West Bank and reoccupying, of course, Gaza, that opens the door for unprecedented violence. And we can see like some signs already after the Trump succeeded in the election. We can see how it's reflected on the Israeli settlers. They are burning Palestinian communities, burning. So probably you're thinking of South Africa. So it becomes officially an apartheid. But what are we relying on? What international community? What international human rights standards? There are no standards. It fell apart during the past few months. Palestinians don't see any difference between Trump or Joe Biden, between the envoy, the previous or the current, or the one who's appointed. We don't see. Like the difference is in their language, but it's like the Israeli parties, the difference in their language, but they all agree on colonizing Palestine entirely. We used to have hope of international law, international organizations, but the past 13 months are the proof that we're alone. Mm-hmm. We're alone. Gazans are alone. What's happening in northern Gaza now deprived of water and food, the people, and medicine, being killed in their own houses, bombed and killed. No one can reach them. So even those numbers about those killed in Gaza are not accurate because so many of the Palestinians are not being counted. Where is international law? We have doubts, I would say. We have doubts. I put aside the public, people with consciousness. I put aside the activists around the world who have not stopped acting, protesting, but as world powers,
Mhm. Well, my hope, and maybe it's a vain one, is that if they do formally annex the West Bank, pressure will increase on Western governments to finally impose sanctions on Israel, because they won't be able to claim any longer that there is a peace process. But I admit that I don't have a lot of hope that that's actually going to happen. I do, however, I've said this repeatedly, and I'm going to say it again. I believe the Palestinian people at the end of the day will save themselves by hook or by crook. Sadly, tragically, many will suffer and die before they achieve liberation, but they are on the path to liberation. I have every confidence in that, Rahab, in no small part because there are people like you in historic Palestine whose courage and determination are legendary. So I thank you once again for joining me, and please stay safe, my dear friend, and keep us posted about developments on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris for Reason to Resist on November 19th, 2024.